You all have 1 week to get this video to 1,000 likes. If you do, I'll make another video talking about 6 more decks that were not mentioned in this one. Consider it a birthday present to me. So what are you waiting for? Be sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Let's go ahead and talk about some EX2 deck lists for the Digimon TCG. Alright y'all, no real order in this video. I'm just going to be giving you all the decks that I'm currently playing in EX2 so you can try them out for yourselves. And we're starting off with one of my favorites, BlkWarGreymon. You guys know, ever since BT8 came out, BlkWarGreymon has been my pet project, constantly playing it, constantly talking to my pal Lychee, who got second place with this deck, about new ways to improve it as the meta evolves, and this is my current iteration. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the major points. Firstly, we have BlkWarGreymon himself, who is, in my opinion, the epitome of mid-range, having tons of cool removal, not just for Digimon, but also for Tamers on his face, while also being a way for you to multi-attack and maybe get some extra damage once you do actually get ahead in the game. BlkWarGreymon is the kind of deck that I think once it gets ahead, it stays ahead, and this card is the reason why. Alongside him, we have some really cool aggro packages in the form of BT1WarGreymon and EX1WarGreymon. WarGreymon honestly is kind of a flex pick. Now that things like Mirror Match and X Antibody are less popular, I could see this card going down, but the main star of the show is for sure WarGreymon, getting that plus security attack on Evo and turning off all the pesky security effects that we all hate is super nice for guaranteeing game against your opponent. Another level 6 you can play is the promo BlkWarGreymon from the Dash Pack of Set 4. He's also a really fun way to sort of enable OTKs. Besides that, the deck is pretty straightforward. We have a lot of sort of Greymon tribal value things in the form of Nokia package alongside BT5 Greymon, but we also have really neat things like the Agumon promo that you can play and get rid of 3,000 or less, really useful against these pesky floodgates like Sayakomon, Betamon, etc. And I think the overall star, besides of course Metal Greymon himself, is Chimeramon, weirdly enough. Being able to reduce the DP of certain things can really help you clear a board without having to attack, and being able to build a huge stack of plus security Greymons, power DP gain Greymons is super nice when you want to create a very powerful BlkWarGreymon. Overall, this deck is one of my favorites. It's surprisingly aggressive, so if your opponent disrespects your offense, you can't just kill them, and overall, I really like having a way to interact with Tamers, given that hybrid decks are becoming more popular in EX2, so if I were you, I recommend testing with this deck and seeing what kind of success you can find with it. My one piece of advice to everyone playing this deck is to play a bit slower and really try to find value on Chimeramon turns. This card in this deck is just crazy. And if you think I'm going to stop playing this deck after EX2, you are sorely mistaken. The existence of Gaiomon is definitely going to keep this deck alive in my heart, and I think hopefully in all of yours. The next deck I want to talk about is probably the most popular one ever since BT8 got released, and that is Imperialdramon. If you guys have never seen this deck before, it's basically the quintessential DNA Digivolution deck. You combine XVmon from EX1 and Stingmon from the starter deck to create Imperialdramon, and with that you get a multi-attacking, draw card, jamming monster. I mean, on the ideal turn, you swing XVmon, hard play Stingmon, DNA Digivolve into Imperialdramon, swing 2 more times, and then evolve into like fighter mode / dragon mode and gain a ton of advantage from there that will probably lead into an OTK on the following turn. Some people think of this as the high roll deck of the format, where if you draw everything you want, no deck can compete with you, and I would kind of have to agree. That being said, it is a little fragile. It can be hard to sort of come back when you fall behind because there's no like hard single combo. Everything kind of relies on multiple pieces, but thanks to the cards that I've decided to include, like Labramon or Argomon BT5, there are ways to either gain a ton of extra resources so that way you can sort of mitigate the threat of potential removal / setbacks, and of course have your own like floodgatey style card against, again, these ever-growing hybrid / tamer based decks. Other than that though, the deck is pretty simple. You have things like Blitz Omni again to give you just like an ultimate cap on your aggression. You have tons of Tamers for utility, ways to guarantee pieces, ways to actually get more memory and extra attack, attacks, and ways to get extra bodies on board that could create value for you over time. And from there, we have a collection of just busted option cards like Hammer Spark, Hidden Potential, and Mega Death. And I think the only real interesting thing that I haven't talked that much about is this inclusion of Labramon from EX2. It's kind of the only new card in this deck, being able to give you extra memory when you swing with your XVmon, and then when you DNA Digivolve, resetting that once per turn effect on your Imperialdramon. And yeah, that's my Imperial deck. I don't think it's a one note, like only do one thing deck. I do think there is more to the Imperial archetype. That being said though, it can just high roll its way to victory against anything, so why wouldn't you give that a try whenever possible? My one piece of advice to anyone playing this deck is don't be afraid to play a little bit slower. Go for a Pyildra or a Dino Bee or a Chimera in the raising. Guarantee yourself that value on cards like Dragon Mode or Fighter Mode, and then use your patented like Wombo combos to gain aggressive tempo in the mid to late game and see how that works out for you. We do have cards like Lydramon in here that can gain us extra value on top of Dragon Mode by just evolving normally. Up next, we have a deck that I feel people are sort of underestimating in the EX2 format, and that is Mastemon. Now, I played Mastemon at the Ohio Regionals for Digimon, and I loved it so much. And now that we have actual tamer-focused decks back into the meta, having things like Lucemon Chaos Mode seems really valuable, because when you combine this card with Mastemon's DNA Digivolution ability to summon something out of the security, you can gain a ton of advantage against Digimon-focused decks, or like wider base decks, and tamer focused decks by being able to kill Digimon and tamers at the exact same time. And I've always said Mastemon is one of the craziest cards in Digimon. She's basically a walking snowball. The more turns she stays in play, the more advantage you're going to continuously gain over your opponent until they're eventually dead. I love this deck, and we have a ton of options for combating even the scariest of decks in EX2. We have powerful ways to reduce DP and control boards, like Flame Hellscythe and Chaos Degrade. We have plenty of ways to maximize the consistency of this deck, thanks to things like Lady Devamon, 4 copies of Gatomon, and even our various rookies. And on top of that, we have one of my favorite inclusions in Creepymon. Against the yellow hybrids, against the security controls, against the mirror matches of the world, we can just bust out Creepymon and actually deck people out. And if that wasn't enough, we can just, like, worst comes to worst, evolve into this boy while our opponent has like 2 Digimon in play, mill 4 cards, and then summon a Chaos Mode from our trash for free. I mean, that feels pretty good. I'm of the opinion that Mastemon has no bad matchups as long as you're a good pilot. I highly recommend you try out this list if you haven't played this deck already. And if you're like me and are a fan of Mastemon, please continue to be one, because next set we're getting Ordainemon, and she's going to be a super fun inclusion. Okay, up next we have one of the biggest letdowns personally in EX2 in D-Reaper. Now, I'm on record for saying that D-Reaper was one of my favorite archetypes out of EX2, and that is still true. I still love the idea of this deck, even though it looks super weird on dev. Basically, if you don't know, this is a pseudo control / setup deck that uses the powerful effects of Mother D-Reaper to sort of snowball advantage every single turn by playing many copies of ADR2 Searcher that will enable you to play all these powerful Reapers for super cheap, swarm your board, get a lot of value out of playing that many bodies, and then eventually wrap it up with the big win condition of Big Daddy Reaper, who can attack 4+ times the second he comes into play. It's a really cool deck in theory, and in Japan it was an absolute monster, but here in the US it hasn't really been doing that great because we really love our aggressive decks, and decks that can just force this one into awkward situations or kill it before Mother ever reaches 6+ sources is really difficult to deal with, even though we are playing the yellow version that has quote-unquote the best defense. I mean, I'm even playing 3 copies of Holy Flame the second they get checked in security, basically buy you an extra turn of ramping sources and gaining searchers, but that still sometimes isn't enough. That being said, I do still like this deck, and you need to respect it in this format because it is still playable, it is still viable, and it can just sneak up on you if you are not prepared. If you guys don't know, the main engine of the deck are these 19 copies of Searchers. You could play more, but I think 19/18 are like the most ideal numbers because they give you enough room to play other cards as well as maximize your chances of seeing a Searcher every single turn. We have powerful ramp cards like Bubbles and Jerry, which can let us gain extra searchers underneath our mother every single turn. And then we have, in my opinion, the ultimate payoffs to playing a lot of searchers in Gatekeeper and Reaper. Gatekeeper is basically a holy flame with legs that on security check will play itself and recover you 1. Crazy unfair card. And then we have, of course, Reaper, who has Rush. You can reduce his cost to 0 by removing 7 searchers, and then every time he attacks, you can place 2 searchers underneath from your trash. He'll restand, and then he can attack again. As long as you have 7 searchers, you can get 4 attacks. If you have 8, 10, 12, it goes up from there. I think the most ideal number is always 8, because if you have him plus like 1 other body in play that can't attack, that's 6 security checks worth of attacks. You can win the game right there. Overall, this deck is kind of a meme at this point. No one's really putting the time in to make it work beyond just what you're seeing right here. I do think it takes a very skilled pilot to do well with this deck, because you definitely can overextend, and you definitely can just not have enough time as you think you do. And if you only put all your eggs into the gotta play Reaper as soon as possible basket, you will lose out on a lot of potential victory, because this deck is really good at just playing a bunch of bodies that you can use to attack and clear your opponent's board. And if you're a D-Reaper fan out there, please figure out ways to make this deck better, and I'll join you. It is our destiny to make this deck good. Moving on from the deck people thought they were supposed to worry about in EX2 to the deck they are now worried about in EX2, Blue Hybrid. Talk about a blast from the past, ladies and gents. I always knew, until the X Antibody cards come out in set 9, this deck wasn't going anywhere, and I'm honestly surprised it took until EX2 format for it to actually start putting up numbers in tournaments again. Anyway, this is the new iteration of Blue Hybrid. It looks very similar to the old one. You still have that high focus on really valuable rookies like Sayakamon and Madoki Betamon to help punish your opponent and sort of floodgate them out of resources. You have the patented Tamer plus Blue Hybrid Bear plus Wolf Boys to just annoy your opponent, gain resources, and get guaranteed damage out of nowhere. And then you have the pseudo boss monsters, which really aren't needed but are nice inclusions, like a Zulongmon and Susanomon that can just help you win a game out of nowhere. The only actual new card that this deck gained since BT7 is this one called Innocence Blizzard, which essentially is an option card that has 3 freeze effects the second you play it. It's a really powerful defensive tool, either in security or in hand, and it's honestly super strong. A lot of the winning lists are playing like 2 or 3 copies of it, but I'm really enjoying the higher tamer count, and I feel like sacrificing option cards for more tamers is the natural thing. But if you want to take out things like Susano or Zulong, they are definitely cuttable. And yeah, that's about it. There's really not much else to say about Blue Hybrid that I have not said already in past videos, or that you have not complained about in Discord groups or Facebook posts. But here's my Blue Hybrid deck in case you were wondering. Okay, so it's a fact that everyone hates Blue Hybrid, but it's also a fact that everyone loves Terriermon Hybrid. This is the last deck I have for y'all, and it is my take on Russell Lepar's Terriermon Hybrid deck that he used to win one of the recent Ultimate Cups. It is an absolute beauty of a green deck. I talked about earlier how like BlkWarGreymon was the epitome of like the mid-range value deck. I might have been lying to you, because this deck does exist, and boy oh boy, in the early turns can this deck just pump out aggression and advantage out of nowhere. I don't know what it is, but being able to on one memory evolve into things like Metal Kabuterimon on top of JP and then get a piercing check while resting something just still feels super strong. And when you combine that with the potential of things like Terriermon to let you gain memory when playing your green tamers, that will then translate into a super powerful Rapidmon turn to control your opponent's board. Whew. It feels so good. On top of that, you still have the powerful level 6 toolbox that things like Rhino Kabuterimon enable for you. Things like Ancient Beetlemon for extra guaranteed aggression against decks. Shivamon to help punish those option card focused yellow decks. And then of course, the new inclusion of extra copies of Argomon from BT5 to punish other hybrid / tamer based decks. This deck does everything I think you want it to do. It can get really powerful guaranteed aggression through its tamer Tamer and Green Hybrid cards. It can have tons of powerful control tools thanks to Rapidmon, Shivamon, and Argomon. And to top it all off, it can just be super annoying because if you attack and check a JP or a Samada Santi in the security, you'd be surprised how much value you can gain during your opponent's following turn. I really love this deck. I'm really proud of Russell for doing so well with it, and I'm surprised at how many people have just started jamming this deck and have been testing it. I recommend you hop on that bandwagon because this deck is so much fun. And if I had to give you one piece of advice when it comes to using this deck, it would be use this deck. Because of all the toolbox cards, because of like the differing engines that are inside of it, there's so many diverging decision trees that you have to go through in any given game, it can be actually difficult to come up with the right one in any given situation. And the only real way to actually, solve that problem is to put in the work, to put in the games. So definitely if you plan on playing this in any Ultimate Cups, local events, or whatever, I definitely recommend you practice well beforehand against all the matchups you're worried about. Because unlike some of the other decks on this list, the overall card quality isn't blatantly powerful. These cards all have ceilings, they all have certain windows where they're really strong, and it's up to you to figure out where those windows are and then seizing the opportunity when they come. And boom, there you guys go. That wraps up all of my decks for the EX2 format. If you guys want to see 6 more deck lists that I have not showed you in this video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.